Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're putting on our instructor hats, really digging into a fundamental part of building a solid information security framework.
That's right.
We're going to meticulously explore Clause 6 of ISO AEC 27001.2022, the focus planning.
Think of us as your guides through this, essential stage for creating a robust information security management system, an ISMS.
Consider Clause 6 the core curriculum, maybe, for setting up your ISMS.
Exactly. It's where the groundwork is laid,
Yeah.
how you plan to manage and improve information security. And our source today is the standard itself. Can't get more definitive than that.
Our mission for this session is pretty clear. We'll dissect Clause 6 step by step, right in the order it appears in the standard.
We think understanding these requirements sequentially is really key for, proactively managing those InfoSec risks and grabbing opportunities for improvement.
So ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's start with Section 6.1, Actions to Address Risks and Opportunities. And like any good lesson plan, we'll begin with the general overview in 6.1.1.
Okay, 6.1.1. This first part really sets the stage for all the planning that follows. It says when an organization plans its ISMS, it can't just operate in a vacuum.
No, definitely not. It absolutely must consider those internal and external issues we talked about from Clause 4.1.
Right, things like company culture, the tech you use, the market, regulations, all that context stuff.
Precisely. And it also has to keep a close eye on the requirements of interested parties from Clause 4.2.
Customers, suppliers, regulators,
Yeah.
anyone with a stake in your security.
Yeah, the link between Clause 4 and Clause 6 is really the foundation. You need that context first.
So based on that, understanding your context, your stakeholders, the next step is pinpointing the specific risks and opportunities relevant to your information security.
It's about figuring out what could go wrong, but also, importantly, where you might have chances to get better.
Okay. And Clause 6.1.1 lays out three key objectives for actually addressing these risks and opportunities, sort of the why behind the planning.
Exactly. Think of them as the big picture goals. First, you want to ensure the ISMS can actually achieve its intended outcomes.
So protecting confidentiality, integrity, availability, the CIA triad, making sure it works.
That's goal number one. Second, you need to proactively work to prevent or, at least reduce undesired effects.
Things like breaches, financial hits, service disruptions, the bad stuff.
Right. Minimize the negative impacts. And the third objective,
Continual improvement.
continual improvement, yes. Using this understanding of risks and opportunities to constantly refine and enhance your security practices. Always getting better.
So effective, resilient, and always improving. Got it. Makes sense.
Those are the pillars.
So once you've ID'd the risks and opportunities and you know these core goals, what are the actual planning actions required? The concrete steps.
Okay, so 6.1.1 specifies two key planning actions. First, you plan what actions you'll take to address those risks and opportunities.
Like implementing controls, changing a process, maybe accepting a small risk. The what?
Right, the strategic decisions. And the second planning action,
The how.
the how, exactly.
Yeah.
You need to plan how you'll integrate and implement these actions into your ISMS processes, and crucially, how you'll evaluate their effectiveness later on.
So not just doing it, but checking if it actually worked.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You need to know if your actions are making a difference. Plan, do, check, act, essentially.
Okay, that sets the general framework. Now let's get into the details, starting with 6.1.2, Information Security Risk Assessment. This feels like a really critical piece.
It absolutely is.
Well,
This is the detective work part. The standard mandates a defined and applied information security risk assessment process. It needs to be documented.
Not just a vague idea of risks, but a structured, repeatable method.
Correct. And this process has several key requirements. First up, establishing and maintaining risk criteria.
Risk criteria. Okay, what does that mean in practice? Setting the rules?
Pretty much. Setting the rules of engagement for your assessment. Two critical parts here. First, define your risk acceptance criteria.
So deciding what level of risk the organization is okay living with. After treatment, I mean.
Exactly. What's tolerable, what absolutely needs action. It reflects your risk appetite. It's a fundamental decision.
Like drawing a line in the sand.
Okay.
And the second part of establishing criteria.
Defining the criteria for performing the risk assessments. How will you actually do them?
The methodology. Qualitative, quantitative, mixed. What scales for likelihood and impact? Who's involved?
All of that. Having clear criteria here ensures consistency.
Which leads right into the next requirement, ensuring consistent, valid, and comparable results. Makes sense if the criteria are solid.
Exactly. Apply those well-defined criteria consistently And you get reliable results you can compare over time. Vital for tracking changes and seeing if your efforts are working.
Okay, criteria established. Next step in the detective work.
Actively identifying information security risks. This is 6.1.2c. Applying your process to pinpoint potential risks to confidentiality, integrity, availability within your ISMS scope.
So looking for all the vulnerabilities and threats, what could go wrong with the information itself?
Yep. Unauthorized access, data corruption, system outages. Think broadly. And importantly, as part of this, you must identify the risk owners.
Risk owners, who are they exactly? The people responsible.
The individuals or teams responsible and with the authority to manage specific risks. Assigning ownership is crucial for accountability. Someone needs to be in charge of each risk.
Like the captain of that part of the ship's safety. Good analogy. Okay, risks identified, owners assigned. What's next?
Next is 6.1.2d, analyzing the information security risks, taking a deeper dive into each one. 3 key parts to this analysis.
All right, what do we analyze for each risk?
First, assess the potential consequences. If the risk happens, what's the impact? Minor inconvenience, major financial loss, reputational damage. Think through the what if.
Right, the potential fallout. Second part.
Assess the realistic likelihood of it occurring. Highly probable, could happen. Very remote. Base this on evidence, data, threat intel, realistic assumptions. Weigh the chances.
Consequences and likelihood. Got it. And the third part of analysis.
Determine the levels of risk. Bring consequence and likelihood together, often using a risk matrix plotting impact versus likelihood to categorize risks, maybe low, medium, high. This helps prioritize.
Okay, so identification, analysis, now evaluation. That's 6.1.2e. How is evaluation different from analysis?
Evaluation is about making judgments based on the analysis. 2 key actions here. First, compare your analysis result against those risk acceptance criteria you set earlier.
So seeing which risks are above or below that line in the sand we talked about, which ones need action.
Exactly. Which ones exceed acceptable levels and require treatment. This is where you decide if a risk is okay for now or needs addressing.
Moment of truth. And the second part of evaluation.
Prioritize the analyzed risks for risk treatment. Usually risks above your acceptance level get higher priority. You might also factor in the sheer scale of impact or likelihood. Focus resources where they matter most.
Makes sense. Tackle the biggest, most likely problems first. And finally, 6.1.2 mentions retaining documented information again.
Yep, recurring theme, and for good reason. You must keep records of the whole risk assessment process.
So the criteria, the methodology, the risks found, the analysis, the evaluation results, the owners, everything.
Everything. It provides evidence, supports consistency for future assessments, and it's essential for audits.
Okay, that's a thorough look at risk assessment. Moving on in our planning curriculum, section 6.1.3, information security risk treatment. So, after assessing, what do we do about the unacceptable risks?
Precisely. Risk treatment is deciding on and implementing actions. 6.1.3 lays out the mandatory process.
First step.
Select appropriate risk treatment options, and this selection must consider the assessment results. No one size fits all.
What are the options generally?
Well, you could avoid the risk, stop the risky activity. You could transfer it, maybe insurance. You could mitigate it and implement controls to reduce likelihood or impact. Or you could accept it if it's within criteria or treatment cost is too high.
So, making informed choices. Avoid, transfer, mitigate, accept. Got it. What's next after choosing the option?
Determine all the necessary controls to implement those options. And note one is important here. You can design controls yourself or identify them from anywhere. Best practices, regulations, internal knowledge.
So figuring out the specific technical and organizational measures needed to execute the strategy.
Exactly. Which leads straight to the next requirement. Comparing your necessary controls with those in Annex A of the standard.
Annex A. That big list of possible controls, like a menu.
Sort of. Note 2 points you there specifically to make sure you haven't missed anything relevant. You must do this comparison.
But it's not the only place to look, right? Note 3 says Annex A isn't exhaustive.
Correct. You might need additional controls beyond Annex A for your specific risks, but the comparison check is mandatory. It ensures broad consideration.
Okay. Checked against Annex A, what follows that?
Producing a statement of applicability, the DUA, that's 6.1.3d. This is a cornerstone document for the ISMS.
The security constitution, you called it.
Yeah.
What absolutely has to be in it?
Okay, mandatory components. First, the list of necessary controls you identified.
Both from Annex A and any others you need.
Yes. Second, for each necessary control included, a justification for including it. Why is it needed?
Makes sense.
Third, state whether each necessary control is implemented or not. current status.
Implemented or planned.
Fourth, if you've excluded any Annex A controls, you need a documented justification for the exclusion. Why isn't it applicable or necessary for you?
So it's comprehensive, lists controls, explains why they're in, their status, and justifies anything left out from Annex A.
Exactly. It's critical documented information showing how you're managing risks. Next step, 6.1.3e, is to formulate an information security risk treatment plan.
The plan. How detailed does this need to be?
It outlines how the chosen options and controls will actually be implemented. For each risk needing treatment, it should specify the actions, who's responsible, and the time frame or target date.
So, turning the strategic decisions into an actionable project plan. Tasks, owners, deadlines.
You got it. And the final step in risk treatment, 6.1.3f.
Getting approval.
Obtaining the risk owner's approval of the treatment plan and their acceptance of the residual information security risks.
Residual risks. The ones left over after treatment. Because you can't eliminate everything.
Almost never possible or practical. So the risk owners, the accountable people, need to formally sign off on the plan and accept the risk that remains after controls are in place.
Signifying they understand what's left and agree it's acceptable.
Precisely. And, surprise, surprise, retain documented information about this whole treatment process too.
Options considered, controls selected, Annex A comparison, the SOA, the plan, the approvals. The whole audit trail.
You need it all.
And there's that note about ISO 31000 alignment can in. Why mention that?
Note 4 points out this ISO 37001 risk process aligns with ISO 31000, the general risk management standard. It shows the approach is based on broader established best practices, not just some niche InfoSec thing.
Good context. It has wider recognition. Okay, we've really covered Section 6.1 now, assessment and treatment. Let's move to Section 6.2, information security objectives and planning to achieve them. Setting the goals for the ISMS.
Correct. 6.2 says the organization must establish information security objectives at relevant functions and levels. These are the specific measurable goals for improving security, not just vague hopes.
Concrete targets. And the standard lists characteristics these objectives shall have. Let's break those down.
Okay, first, they must be consistent with the information security policy from Clause 5.2. They have to align with the overall strategy.
Makes sense. Goals support the policy. What's next?
Second, they should be measurable, if practicable. You need to track progress and know when you've hit the target. Quantifiable is best, but the standard allows some flexibility if measurement isn't fully practical.
Measurability. Key for knowing if you're succeeding. Third characteristic.
They must take into account applicable information security requirements, legal, regulatory, contractual, etc., and the results from risk assessment and treatment.
So, objectives aren't random. They're driven by compliance needs and the specific risks you found. They have to be relevant.
Exactly. Targeted. Fourth characteristic.
Monitoring.
They must be monitored. Set up processes, maybe KPIs, to track progress regularly. Keep an eye on how things are going.
Regular check-ins. Fifth.
They must be communicated to relevant people. Everyone involved needs to know the goals. Fosters shared purpose.
Transparency. Okay. Sixth.
They must be updated as appropriate. Things change context, risks, understanding. So objectives need review and revision to stay relevant and effective. They're dynamic.
Not set in stone, adaptable. And the final characteristic?
Finally, they must be available as documented information. Clearly defined, written down, accessible.
And let me guess, retain documented information on the objectives themselves.
You know it. Clause 6.2 demands it. Provides clarity, accountability, evidence.
Okay, so you've set these smart-ish objectives. Then you need to plan how to achieve them. 6.2 covers that too.
Right. Planning to achieve objectives requires determining several things for each objective. First, what will be done, the specific actions and tasks.
The what?
Second, what resources will be required, people, budget, tools, everything needed.
The resource, okay.
Third, who will be responsible, clear roles and accountability for each action.
The who.
Fourth, when it will be completed, realistic timelines and milestones. The when.
Right.
And finally, how the results will be evaluated, metrics, indicators, methods to confirm success, the how evaluated.
So a complete action plan for every single objective. That's quite detailed planning.
It needs to be, to ensure objectives are actually met.
Okay, we're almost through Clause 6, just Section 6.3 left, planning of changes. Sounds simple.
It's brief, but important. It basically says when the organization needs to change anything in the ISMS, policies, processes, tech, structure, whatever those changes, shall be carried out in a planned manner.
So no winging it. No ad hoc changes without thinking it through.
Exactly. Changes need careful consideration, impact assessment, and controlled implementation. It prevents unintended negative consequences and maintains the ISMS integrity. It ensures changes actually help, not hinder.
Planned and controlled change. Got it.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Clause 6 of ISO IEC 27001.2022.
Phew. We covered a lot.
We did. So to quickly recap what we've gone through today as your instructors,
Yeah.
we explored the core of ISMS planning. That started with actions for risks and opportunities.
Which involve that detailed two-step of risk assessment: identify, analyze, evaluate, and then risk treatment, select options, determine controls, SOA, plan, get approval.
Right. Then we looked at setting clear, measurable information security objectives that align with policy and risks, and the detailed planning needed to actually achieve them. The what, resources, who, when, how evaluated.
And finally, that crucial little point about ensuring any changes to the ISMS are done in a planned, controlled way.
It really does feel like Clause 6 lays the entire foundation, doesn't it? Absolutely. Effective planning, just as Clause 6 lays out, is essential for a robust, proactive ISMS. It's strategic thinking, understanding challenges, setting goals, and having a structured approach.
So for our listeners, thinking back to the initial sources you provided us, maybe take a moment now. How well do you think your organization currently handles these different parts of planning we've discussed from Clause 6?
Yeah. Is your risk assessment process well documented? Are your objectives truly measurable?
Maybe one immediate action you could consider, based on our discussion, is just reviewing that risk assessment documentation, or perhaps taking a fresh look at how clear and measurable your current security objectives really are.
That's a great practical takeaway. And as always, we definitely encourage you to dig into the full ISO IEC 2771.2022 standard itself and related materials. There's always more detail.
Information security is always moving, so yeah, continuous learning is definitely key.